Have you still got that handy? I know you still have it. That bit of sound from America's #1 talk show host and leader of the Tea Party movement and huge influence on people who might pick up a gun and go shoot someone in this country, Glenn Beck.
The radicals that you in Washington have co-opted and brought in wearing sheep's clothing change the pose. You get the ends. You've been using them? They believe in communism. They believe and have called for revolution. You're going to have to shoot them in the head. But warning, they may shoot you.
You're going to have to shoot them in the head. Commenting on, Alan Jones wrote this at the Socialist Alternative in Seattle, commenting on Jared Loughner's assassination attempt against Gabrielle Giffords when he seriously injured or killed 6 others and injured another 13 people. Andrew Sullivan, conservative blogger, wrote, quote, "There is no way to understand the politics of this without Palin. She has long been the leader of the movement that drapes itself in military garb, that marinates in violent rhetoric, that worships gun culture, that has particular ferocity in the state of Arizona, and that never apologizes for anything." End quote. Andrew Sullivan, conservative. In the meantime, you have Glenn Beck suggesting that it's time to shoot people in the head. Since Obama took the oath of office, there have been, excluding the attack against Giffords, at least 7 separate cases of political murder, dozens of attacks by unhinged right-wing elements. And the reason why there have been so many killing sprees can be attributed to a couple of things: the deep economic crisis in this country and the rise of the extremist right-wing rhetoric so personified by Palin, Beck, Limbaugh, Hannity, Savage, the rest of these America haters. It's important to note that during the recent midterm election sessions of the Tea Party movement and at least one Republican senatorial candidate were calling publicly for Second Amendment remedy to the political issues if they weren't addressed to the liking of the right-wing neo-fascist candidate. In other words, guns, shoot, kill, murder. And as Alan Jones points out, it should also be noted that the killing spree took place in Arizona, site of the extreme right-wing Deport Them All immigration bill, SB 1070, the law that would target not only immigrants but also those who looked suspicious. And if you look suspicious, produce your papers. And if you have no papers, please put your hands behind your back. All of that, of course, contributed to the atmosphere of racism and tension in the poor, benighted state of Arizona. What a sad place to live. Alan Jones says, in a period of unprecedented economic crisis and mass unemployment, right-wing demagogues like Sarah Palin, Glenn Beck, Bill O'Reilly, Michael Savage, among many others, have used Rupert Murdoch's Fox News and the vast right-wing network of corporate-funded radio programs and blogs to target immigrants, to target homosexuals, to target socialists, to target public sector workers, to target unions, to target progressive activists. Back in 92, the election of Bill Clinton was also followed by a vicious upsurge of political tension and polarization from the right that culminated in the Oklahoma City federal building bombing in 1995 with hundreds of deaths of innocent workers, including children. Oh, I misspoke. I'm sorry. Scores of deaths. It was only 168. That also belonged to Limbaugh and the rest of these right-wing pigs. New York Times and Rupert Murdoch's terrorist broadcast network reported that 22-year-old Loughner may have links to a white supremacist website Other evidence also points to connections between Loeffner and extreme right-wing influence, including references to treasonous laws by the government, currencies not backed by gold, the second U.S. Constitution, government mind control, and on and on and on. All stuff you can hear if you can stomach listening, to Beck or Hannity or Limbaugh or the rest of these freaks. More when we come back from the break. So it hasn't even been 2 weeks since the attack engineered by the media right wing in this country against a sitting U.S. member of Congress. Play that Glenn Beck thing again there, Kathy.
The radicals that you in Washington have co-opted and brought in wearing sheep's clothing change the pose. You get the ends. You've been using them? They believe in communism. They believe and have called for revolution. You're going to have to shoot them in the head. But warning, they may shoot you.
Have to shoot them in the head. And Alan Jones, writing a socialist analysis of what happened, continuing, it is true that many of Loeffner's ideas are delusional, deranged, and more laced with conspiracy theories than overtly political, but that's not the whole story. Crucial to understanding these events is the political climate. Giffords, a Jewish conservative Democratic congresswoman, had just won a close election against a right-wing Tea Party extremist candidate. According to the New York Times, there had been threats of violence, including the smashing of the plate glass window of her Tucson office last March, because Giffords supported Obama's health care insurance bill and opposed Arizona's racist anti-immigrant profiling law. Due to the threats of violence, Giffords herself had said that she was armed and would defend herself if attacked. At his first press conference after the shooting, the sheriff of Pima County, Clarence Dupnick, spoke openly of, quote, the vitriol and rhetoric that we hear day in and day out from the people in the radio business and some people in the TV business, end quote, which he said was related to the attack. Referring to racist measures against immigrants, he said that the state of Arizona has, quote, become the mecca for prejudice and bigotry, end quote. The sheriff was referring to the anti-immigrant hysteria and the activities of armed vigilantes along the border with Mexico in Arizona. In response to Dupnick's comments about the circumstances that led to the massacre in Tucson, Arizona's right-wing media brazenly denounced him and called for his resignation. Commenting on the massacre, Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal wrote in an editorial that Loeffner was, quote, mentally disturbed, confused, and he targeted Giffords simply because she was, quote, prominent. Incredibly, another part of Murdoch's media empire, the right-wing Fox News, which has been at the forefront of inciting demagogic, hateful, and inflammatory rhetoric, denied any responsibility for the massacre. Fox News even demanded that Obama denounce those who want to blame anyone other than Loeffner for the violence, as if Loeffner had acted in a vacuum. In their editorial, the New York Times wrote that Loeffner, quote, is very much a part of a widespread squall of fear, anger, and intolerance that has produced violent threats against scores of politicians and infected the political mainstream with violent imagery, end quote, New York Times, which sounds a little bit like this.
The radicals that you in Washington have co-opted and brought in wearing sheep's clothing change the pose. You get the ends. You've been using them? They believe in communism. They believe and have called for revolution. You're going to have to shoot them in the head. But warning, they may shoot you.
This so-called squall of fear has given rise to a populist right-wing phenomenon within the Republican Party, as was shown in the gains they made in the last midterm elections on the basis of demagogic attacks. The right-wing propaganda by Fox News, the Tea Party, candidates like Michelle Bachmann, Sarah Palin against immigrants and unions became necessary as the ruling class looked to deflect blame for the crisis that they caused, create scapegoats, and try to forestall united struggles of the working class. Well, of course. Gangster capitalism. They hire vampires like Glenn Beck, Hannity, Limbaugh, and the rest of these monsters to divert your attention. Oh, the communists have moved into Washington. Oh, the socialists are taking over. You're going to have to shoot them, Beck says. You're going to have to shoot them in the head, Beck says. Alan Jones continues, while Obama and the Democrats call for unity and make appeals against violence, they are sending drones to kill civilians in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We are called on to salute the so-called bravery of all politicians while they slash education and child care for our children and oversee a system that offers little hope for a decent future for people or the environment. Corporate domination and their political puppets are all to blame for a sick culture that creates isolation, alienation, violence, and fear. The media fills the airwaves with stories about why you should be afraid of your neighbors, while Glenn Beck says repeatedly that the Republic is hanging by a thread.
The radicals that you in Washington have co-opted and brought in wearing sheep's clothing change the pose. You get the ends. You've been using them? They believe in communism. They believe and have called for revolution. You're going to have to shoot them in the head. But warning, they may shoot you.
According to the FBI, there was a 300% increase in threats against members of Congress in 2010 and over 1,000 death threats a month against Obama. Remember back in 2009, the Department of Homeland Security warned that, quote, right-wing extremism, end quote, was increasing because of the economic downturn, the election of the first African-American president, and pointed to the recruitment of returning vets into right-wing extremist organizations. Bigoted, hysterical, anti-Muslim attacks are now in the mainstream media and part of the Republican establishment. Just before September 11th last year, there were several instances of arson, bombings, vandalism against mosques in Tennessee, Texas, and Florida, as well as the stabbing of a Muslim cab driver in New York City. All of it encouraged by the right-wing demagogues that infest media in this country. The attack and serious injury of Gabriel Giffords and the killing of 6 other people in Tucson was not a random event. It is a warning to working people about the serious political danger involved in the rise of the extreme right wing and the need to challenge their racist, militarist, and anti-worker propaganda. And as Alan Jones writes, because of the massive disappointment with the policies of the Democrats, there is a serious danger that the pro-corporate, well-organized, well-funded by billionaires Tea Party will continue to build its forces across the country. Although the far right will initially become undermined by this event, the shooting in Tucson, they will become a battering ram against the interests of working-class people who have suffered the most from the economic crisis. And the Democrats and the liberal left have shown that they are incapable of solving problems like mass unemployment and cuts in services, which are fueled by this so-called squall of anger. Furthermore, the Democrats are incapable of taking on the Tea Party by exposing its corporate backing. Why? Because they are also funded by the same corporate system. That's why. Serious workers and young people recognize the danger that the rise of the Tea Party represents and the need to confront its ideas. The Democrats cannot do this. It is urgent to call on unions and immigrant workers' organizations and anti-war groups and anti-cuts coalitions and socialists to organize rallies and demonstrations against the Tea Party, exposing their true backers and their racist and militaristic pro-corporate propaganda. You think we can do that? You think that'd be done? No, unlike Glenn Beck, we don't advocate that they shoot him in the head. Organize, organize, Organize. One of the scariest people in the entire liberal pantheon that these right-wingers are terrified of are people, a man named Saul Alinsky, who put the whole solution into 3 words: organize, organize, organize. Whenever you hear respectable media types, if that's not a contradiction in terms, aligning themselves with the right-wing crazy people in media like Beck and the rest of his ilk, and trying to convince you, oh, Gerald Loeffler was just crazy. There's no connection. There's nothing there. Move along. There's no instigation by right-wingers 24/7, coast to coast, border to border. You want to hear it? Turn on the radio anytime during the day and listen to them. Listen to them. Listen to Limbaugh and Beck and Hannity and Savage and the rest of these monsters. Listen to them. And then you tell yourself whether or not what you're hearing is truth or an attempt to make you, in Beck's words, shoot someone in the head. Alan Jones, writing for the Socialist Alternative in Seattle, a socialist analysis of what occurred in Arizona. And in his last paragraph, Alan Jones writes, the organizing of immigrant workers' organizations, anti-war groups, unions, coalitions against these government cuts in social spending, socialists to organize rallies and demonstrations against the Tea Party, in an attempt to expose the backers of the Tea Party. This is not a populist movement. My God, it is backed by a couple of billionaires who do this for sport. And they hire proto-fascists like Beck to get on the radio every day and tell people to go shoot each other in the head. But the organizing, Alan Jones writes, should go hand in hand with serious mass campaigns to oppose the avalanche of budget cuts in education, health care, and services coming on the state and city level, like cops, like firefighters, like sanitation workers, like public school teachers, right? Jones says we need to prepare to run independent left candidates to put forward an independent working class fighting program of good jobs, full benefits, an end to war, an end to racist scapegoating. And in this way, we can start to deal with the real source of the enormous social discontent that is increasing in the United States because of the devastation of the lives of tens of millions of ordinary people as a result of the so-called crisis of capitalism, this destruction, this gangster capitalism. So, an alternative vision by Alan Jones and Mary, who sent this to me, said, Mike, the massacre of Loeffler was, of course, a response by a misled and confused individual who was wound up and set off by the right-wing rhetoric of right-wing organizations like the Tea Party and others. Right-wing groups like the Tea Party have been created to deflect attention from the real reasons for the economic crisis and instead blame immigrants, blame minorities, use divide and conquer strategies to keep the working class from uniting and fighting against these assaults from the ruling class. And unfortunately, they control the media, whether it's CNN, Fox, NPR, ABC, NBC, CBS, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. So there will never be any real analysis of the economic crisis and what is actually happening to working people. This is an intentional strategy by the ruling class. They don't want people to understand that the ruling elites are responsible for this. And so demagogues like Palin and Beck and Savage and the rest of the crew are brought in to spew right-wing populism and recruit many confused people into the ranks of right-wing shock troops which are then used to fight against the interests of those of us in the working class. And ironically, many of these confused recruits will also be fighting against their own interests. So you have, on the one hand, solutions offered by Alan Jones and his socialist analysis of what happened in Tucson. And I might add, not just Tucson. Do you really think it's going to stop now? Do you think that Beck and Palin and the rest of these fascists have dialed anything back? No, they have not. They've doubled down. More of the same. But you have an alternative, an offering from democratic socialists. And then you have, of course, Glenn Beck.
The radicals that you in Washington have co-opted and brought in wearing sheep's clothing change the pose. You get the ends. You've been using them? They believe in communism. They believe and have called for revolution. You're going to have to shoot them in the head. But warning, they may shoot you.
You're going to have to shoot them in the head. Joe Loeffner shot a bunch of people in the head, didn't he? Yeah, he did. Following almost to the letter Glenn Beck's directive. You're going to have to shoot them in the head! And there are still people in media and politics who want to convince the rest of us that this filthy right-wing rhetoric somehow exists in a vacuum. Over there! Well, you gotta go listen to it on the radio. It's not part of anything that motivates these crazy people. Whether they're on their way to the Tides Foundation to commit mass murder, or whether they actually commit it in Tucson, or whether they kill cops, or whether they do this or do that, or whether they break into this place and gun down people, it doesn't matter. The right-wing rhetoric, you see, has nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it at all. When Glenn Beck says, you're going to have to shoot them in the head, why, my goodness, he's just setting you up to hear the next commercial set in his program. You know, the ones that sell you dehydrated food and gold coins. I'll see you tomorrow night. Take care. Keep it lit. I'm Mike Malloy.